everybody. Welcome back to the Meaning Forge. Today I have with me Stephen Spaulding. Stephen is a high-powered recruiter and a recruiter and now leader who tries to find ways to help people make joy in their life. And today we're going to examine his life story, and we're going to see where he comes from, how he makes and find meaning in his life, how he embodies that meaning, and how he shares that meaning. So I hope that you join me today and you listen to Stephen Spaulding's story. Let's get into it. Hey, Stephen, welcome to the Meaning Forge. Pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So I like to start these interviews going through people's lives, right? And then we start going through the different symbology in the Meaning Forge, which is hammer, sword, pen, and crown. And I must say it's been quite a journey so far, and I've had a lot of great guests, and it's been illuminating in more ways than one.
I'm sure.
So during the life story, I get to ask the dreaded question. And as a recruiter, you, sir, get to ask this question a lot. And that is, tell us about yourself. Who is Stephen? Where does he come from? And, then we'll get started from there.
Okay. So what's funny about the question is you can answer that at 50 different layers. There's who I am growing up, light-skinned, mixed race in the deep South. We're in a very racist community. And then there's the evolution I've taken professionally, starting as a college admissions counselor, recruiter for colleges, and making my way to being a talent acquisition manager now, supporting a massive healthcare facility on the West Coast. But I think when I put on my recruiter hat to answer that question, I think where I would land on who is Stephen is Stephen first as a father, a husband, a coach. I would say if you were putting it on my gravestone, I might say husband, father, coach would be who I am today, if you want to just net it out.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Actually, I like that. And I guess before we get into some of the like how those came to be, is I think that's kind of like where we can take this now. What are some significant memories that's kind of molded you today that are significant and salient to you now, growing up where you're from, and how they've impacted you?
Well, so in that sense, I'm putting on the personal person, the man sitting here, the hat. Growing up where I grew up, it's funny, I just took my son and daughter through the town where I grew up to visit my mom just yesterday. And we were kind of coming into the city, and my son asked me, he said, did you enjoy growing up here? And I said, no. And it kind of shocked him. And he said, why not? And I said, because it was racist and people were mean. You got to understand, look at me. I'm freckle-faced, curly-haired, light-skinned, and I was exactly between every group of people I tried to be a part of. I wasn't quite accepted as as someone white, wasn't quite accepted as someone black, in a funky, weird way, held up by both as some kind of acceptable conglomeration of the two. But the most telling piece of my upbringing is that of being a chameleon. And the good news and the bad news of it, to be really honest, is if you were to ask me, but when I was still in my hometown, in small town, North Carolina, who I was, I'd say to you, depends on who's asking. Because if it was some white church member where my mom was the organist, I might tell you one thing. And if it was some black church member of my neighborhood where I lived, I might tell you something different, because I had to constantly assess this middle ground presence that I had. I was neither fully embraced by either side. So my prominent memories is that of being isolated, of being in the middle, not the center, that's different, in the middle, between, not the Venn diagram, but the space between the two circles. And that's my prominent memory of my upbringing in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. And so as we start to transitioning and we start to move forward, because you said that you start here, and kind of using some of the words here, you're a chameleon, you're hidden,
Mm-hmm.
you're not being seen in some ways. How did you start moving forward? Like, did you recognize that initially and then start saying, like, how do you start changing that?
Yeah. Well, it depends on if you want to change that. I don't think I changed it. I turned it into a strength. I think I began to realize that being able to code switch, culture switch, was what could be advantageous. It's the reason I learned foreign languages. It's the reason I like to travel. It's the reason I wanted to be a diplomat originally. I wanted to be an ambassador, because I thought that ability to read the room and stay true to me, but yet, look, it wasn't really that I was a chameleon. Let's be clear. So let me be crystal clear. If I was comprised of characteristics A through Z, what I meant early on when I said I'm a chameleon, I would only show you items B, J, T, and Z. It wasn't that the rest of the 22 items in the alphabet weren't there. It's just I coded in and figured these are the 4 that matter in this particular interaction. At the time, my mistake was that I thought I was truly switching, that I was faking, that I was saying to people something that wasn't true. But what I learned, but what became my superpower, was that I am A through Z, and what I choose to honor and bring forth is what can move a situation forward. It's the ability to go be a representative to the Black community, or to the white community, or to the Native American community, or to none of the above, and to know that my humanity across A to Z is rich enough for me to pull experiences from it to be able to connect to whoever's in front of me. So I took it from being a weakness, which it really felt like as a child, to saying that is the greatest gift that I could have received. There used to be a famous football player, a football coach, who said, you have to be careful with your weaknesses, because weaknesses, or no, I think what he said was strengths under duress become weaknesses. And I was always aware of that. And I knew that there was, even as a child, I knew there was something very powerful about being able to communicate and be believable by many people, even though it felt isolating as a child. But as I grew older, I flipped the switch and said, I'm no longer going to think of that as a weakness, but rather as something that's very powerful and allows me to connect with the many different people I'm able to connect with. It is my superpower, by the way.
Yeah, I was just thinking that as you explained that further, I realized I missed that, and that you were able to, because you started piecing it together a little bit, and it was like, I can read the room, I can code switch, I can do all these different things, and now when I'm in a certain area, I know what I'm looking for, and yeah, we can see how that is isolating, as you were saying earlier, and then turning that later into a, no, this is not isolating. I now have
No.
the ability to go into these spaces and engage people in a meaningful and connect with them in a meaningful way.
And I guess in a way, Jim, what I guess what I've come to understand is that in fact I am the Venn diagram. I am that center overlap, as opposed to that child perception that there's a circle here, and I'm in the space between the two.
Yeah.
And I think in fact what I grew to understand is that I'm in a Venn diagram.
No,
And it's not just race. I want to be clear, Jim. It's not just race.
Mm-hmm.
It's the reason I'm a voracious reader and learner. I want to have the ability to vent to anyone, any age, any situation. It's my ultimate desire is to be able to make anyone feel connected to, make anyone feel uniquely seen and heard.
Yeah, let's dive a little further into that later on. Like I really want to dive into that because human connection is really important. And I guess what I want to go into now is looking at, so you grow up, you get out of, I'm assuming you get out of town, right?
Pretty much right after high school, I knew I would leave and not come back to live.
So let's talk about right after high school, and let's talk about, what got you to where you are today.
So I went to a small college in North Carolina, coincidentally a Quaker college. Quakers are interesting in that I knew nothing about them, but my brother was at the Quaker school and my sister was at a large state school, and it was only going to be one of those two. So I chose the small liberal arts college. But there were a couple of things that were present there that were great influencers. One is that everyone was on a first name basis. And when you talk about human connection, think about a 17-year-old who can walk into the college and call the president of the college by their first name, or call your professors by their first name. Now, I understand that for some people that informality can make them uncomfortable, but it had the exact opposite effect for me. It was a collegiality that I had never felt. Keep in mind the person who arrived, which was that person that felt like they were in the space between groups, to come into an organization that they're saying, call me by my first name. And on the board of the college, there were as many students represented on the board as there were their percentage in the overall population. So you have to understand, I was coming into an environment that they're saying, oh no, we see you and expect you to be seen and expect you to show up and be present. So the baseline for my next phase of learning in college was that. I started a new foreign language in German. I had taken French in high school, knew I was going to go abroad. I just knew it. Ended up studying abroad the next fall and the following fall of my junior year. Amazing experience. Everything I experienced, let me say it this way. My upbringing was so provincial that when I went to college, almost every single thing I did was for the first time. Flight on an airplane, going to a foreign country, meeting people from other religions, the people from foreign countries. I just did not have that exposure when I went to college. So college was, I'm going to say this example, and I hope you appreciate it. You know that scene in The Matrix when you can download the cartridges and get instant knowledge? That's what college felt like to me. Everything was just like, I couldn't drink it fast enough. I couldn't learn fast enough. It's when I grew comfortable being uncomfortable. If I wasn't uncomfortable, it didn't feel right. Because I always said, if I'm uncomfortable now, I'll never be this uncomfortable again. And so I ran toward discomfort in college. And that was probably the story of my freshman year, is run toward discomfort, run toward new, run toward the next thing. And I would say that continued through college. But yeah, the freshman year was characterized by that.
That's awesome. And like that's a really it's really cool because you don't see a lot of people who always will run to that,
Oh
especially
no.
as early as college. Like I didn't always run to discomfort. I'm not gonna lie.
Actually, we often run to the opposite. We run to the comfort.
We do.
Quite frankly, just something in me, something in the combination of my parents and my upbringing. I knew when I left that I needed to leap. It just in and let me be clear with you. I would never want any listener to think that I'm just a natural fearless person. I could go behind me the curtain and bring any one of my three kids in, and you could ask them, is your dad afraid? And they would say very frequently. But he moves despite the fear. And I want to be crystal clear. I am afraid frequently. Frequently. I would go so far as to say more of the time than not. But I refuse to let a fear of heights or a fear of discomfort, culturally being in an odd situation, or being on that train for the first time, not speaking the language. I'll get on it 100 times out of 100 in absolute fear.
So that is going to be something I want to also dive into later. I think that's a really good thing to look into. And so you graduate college, you go through and you have a bunch of great experiences abroad. What did you study just for fun?
German and economics. I was a double major. I wanted to be a translator. I wanted to be, at the UN. And I took, but what I realized was, like, while I speak German and I'm comfortable, the level of fluency that's required for truly being a translator and interpreter, I didn't have what it took to get there. I'm not talking intellectual. It was drive. I spoke it well enough, and I didn't want to take those extra hours per week, month, year to get to being perfectly fluent. It's hard. It's hard.
I mean, you did pick economics, which is kind of like, in my mind, like economics is like an ultra, like, how do I phrase this? Like economics is fundamentally like a study of everything in a very loose way.
No, it is.
I love economics as well.
You are absolutely right, and it felt like I couldn't sometimes tell if I was studying sociology or politics or business or I mean it really was an all-encompassing field, and it was definitely the reason I chose it, 100%.
Yeah. So you were a few years ahead of me with deciding on economics. Definitely. I just now kind of started getting into economics, but as you graduate college and you move on, I guess, can we just kind of what's been the narrative so far to where you are today?
The narrative to who I've become.
Oh yeah, like
the themes. Are you saying the themes?
Yeah, what are some of the? Let me rephrase this. Right, what are some of the things that you've done since college to where you are today that have helped develop you as a person? Just general wave top type stuff.
Okay. One is I worked in colleges the early part of my career. I worked in a number of university settings. And so for a voracious learner to be working on a college campus, it is that matrix scene without the immediate download. I went to lectures in every department, physics, more business, more economics, but foreign languages. I mean, I was just a true student of everything, the social sciences, the humanities, computer science, you name it. So learning in that environment, I had to learn to public speak during that period of time because I was doing a lot of presentations. I had to learn to sell as well because the college process shouldn't feel like a student is being sold, because it feels weird if they do. So the ability to influence someone without them feeling sold was a really delicate process that I still call on as a skill set, but just public speaking in general as well. I moved a couple of times. I moved from the South. I moved from a small private college, working the same college where I graduated, to the State University of New York at Binghamton, which is the opposite end of the spectrum: private to public, religious to non-religious, small to big. 1,000 students to 18,000 students, that kind of thing. So again, pushing that envelope of discomfort continued to be a theme. And then I left higher ed altogether to go into corporate recruitment, to work in an agency and work with companies out of Germany and out of India, and just continuing to run toward this nirvanic state of just knowing everything. I would say, other than my marriage and my children, it's the constant gallop toward knowing as much as I could about everything that drives me, still drives me to this day. I want to know everything about AI and quantum, and helps me at IBM, but I just want to know everything. It's frustrating now. It's frustrating, but
one of the things I find out is the more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know.
I know.
The dumber I feel.
Yeah. That's the frustration.
It's so frustrating.
It's a bell curve, and there's a point where it feels like, oh, I'm getting there, and then that other recognition happens, and you're like, what I don't know is bigger than I thought. What I know I don't know is bigger than I thought. That kind of thing.
Exactly. And it's just so many different things that start to happen from that. And it's a really enlightening type of thing.
But I'm going to tell you one big thing was, and I want to be really clear about this, was probably the most successful process I've gone through is overcoming my own self-doubt and depression. It had nothing, no drug use was involved, nothing like that, but it was just maybe that whole isolated sense that started as a kid. I would say that as a single process, the process of dealing with my depression head on, in the way you would deal with a serious drug addiction, like get me through this battle, live to fight another battle. I remember the very day that it began to lift, and it's probably singularly one of the things I'm most proud of, because I did it myself.
So far we have a bunch of different materials and stuff like that coming together. And one of the things that I kind of want to start to dial in on is you're talking about being the Venn diagram, like actually being that thing. Understanding the strengths, it's not strength, it's how to make these perceived weaknesses, and I say perceived, right?
Strengths. I agree.
And then constantly learning, constantly running towards discomfort, and then being hit right in the forgive my analogy here, but you got a shovel now to the face with doubt and depression.
That's right.
And these are things that become incredibly influential to us throughout our time in making who we are today. And I guess the first question is, how did you overcome the doubt and depression to help make who you are today?
Um, let me be clear about something. For me, I knew that if I did not defeat this, it was going to kill me in some way or another, literally or figuratively. It was going to destroy me. So I want to be crystal clear about that. And I'm not sure everyone is at that point when they enter the battlefield of overcoming doubt and depression. And I also somewhere believed one thing very simply, and that is if you improve any amount, any day, every day, this will eventually pass. Eventually, you will have more days that you win than you lose. In some way, I knew that if I could just win the next battle, that I would win the war. And it was very clear to me, even at 24 or 25 years old, or 23, when I was beginning to realize this, that this was not going to happen overnight. That I needed to cut away at this. The marriages are destroyed by 1,000 little cuts, not often that big one. So I knew that this battle was going to come as a result of many little battles along the way. So literally, I would seek, and I know this is going to sound strange, and I'm just going to tell you the honest truth. I approached it like an addiction. You know, when they say that prayer, Lord, get me through this one, get me through this battle right now, this addiction that you're calling right now. It was literally, I would face, sometimes successfully and sometimes not, each battle as if it was the last one or the only one, and just get me through this one. But you know what was really exhausting is initially I was fighting a battle every 10 minutes. Like literally, I would win a battle and the next one would replace it like a domino, just like almost immediately. But I kept believing that eventually the frequency would decrease. And it went from it went from almost immediate to once every half hour that I had to rebattle myself. And then it became an hour. And I don't want you to in any way or anyone to think that I'm sort of lightly glossing over this. It was an ugly, nasty, spit, blood, ugly battle over and over for months. I'm giving you the simple overview of it, but for it to go from every 5 minutes to every 30 minutes may have taken a year. And for it to go from 30 minutes to every hour took another year. And for it to go from an hour to a half to 5 hours was another year. So I started I consciously started this when I was about 25. I was 32 years old. I was sitting at my desk in my house in Glastonbury, Connecticut. And I want to give you this story because I hope you have time. I'll be quick about it. Picture you're in the space you're in, and picture that you're sitting on a scale. The room you're in is the size of a scale, like the justice scale. And way over there is the other side of the scale. And it's up because you're sitting on this side of the scale. Picture the scale the size of your room, and you take one single grain of salt or one single grain of rice, and you put it on that other side of the scale. Picture the weight of the room and how little the effect of one rice grain has in moving it. But each of those rice grains represented a battle won for every 5 minutes, every 30 minutes, every hour. God, get me through this battle with my own self-doubt. Get me through this battle with my own depression. Move the grain. Here we go again. Get me through this self-doubt. Move the grain. I was 33 years old, 32, 33 years old. I was sitting there and I remember the grain that I moved and put it over there. And I want to be clear, the scale didn't move, but in that moment, I knew it was going to move. I knew it was going to move. So it's almost like the roller coaster reached the top and it had that little stop that happens right before it flies down the other side. And from that point on, it felt like a downhill battle instead of an uphill battle. I'm telling you, that was probably a 7-year period. I'm not trying to make that sound fast or slow. I'm just telling you what it was for me.
It's rough, in other words.
It's rough.
And you did it one tiny grain at a time. That's a great story, Stephen, and really powerful, I think. So thank you for sharing that. So this doesn't have to be during this process, but around life in general, who have been some people who you relied on, who have inspired you and it helped influence you, and why?
I would say first, and not just that process, but in general, would be my wife, only because she's an optimist. She is, she did not suffer the doubts and the ghosts that plagued me. So but she was also able to sort of help me navigate through my own process, kind of as that person who can be there to go, yes, I do understand what you're going through, but I'm also over here not experiencing that directly. So, but that aside, I have to tell you, to be honest, I can remember influencers. But honestly, this may sound awful. I had to do this myself. What I felt was I was so isolated that I knew I had to get out of this myself. So my the audience of the people who could help me were books or people that I derived from reading or from I would say like Eckhart Tolle, just his perspective on his own agony helped me. And this may sound funny to say, but I just want you to hear it. When I read a book, I just want you to tell me what you learned. I don't really care how you learned it. I trust that it was an honorable process enough for you to articulate the message to me. As soon as books start telling me how they learn what they learn, I lose complete interest. I would just tell me what you know. Because I've been that Venn diagram, I can translate it to what I need. I can ask my son, who's a soccer player, how would he handle all of a sudden becoming a coach of an indoor team, which is very different than outdoor soccer. And I can translate his answer for me, having just become a manager at IBM. I can translate it over to my situation. I don't need you to tell me that. So I won't lie. I'm trying to make sure there's no one that I'm forgetting. I had people who jumped in the boat. Sometimes it helped me steer for a moment, but I was steering the thing. I'm sorry.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing no. And one of the things that I think I really liked is, the power of your influence is books are an influence. Like books are absolutely there. And for someone like you, who's just a constant learner, just continually learning, continually reading and trying to find answers in one. I sometimes the answers are already there in what the practical experience of others is. That's what Lytle Hart called history.
Yes.
Sometimes.
But like, I'll
Um,
give you an example. I remember there was an interview with the former president. I won't misquote it by saying who I thought it was, but
that's fine.
someone asked this former president kind of how they approach problem solving while in office, and the president said he'd flip a coin, and for the first part of his presidency, he would do what he thought he should do. He said for the latter part of his president, he would do the exact opposite, and he didn't notice a discernible difference.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Like the fact that some there is no one way through for anyone.
Yeah.
You have to respond to each situation. I don't think the president literally did the exact, like if he thought communicating was good, that he would say don't communicate. But you know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
what he's honoring was that I can get to my outcome a number of ways, and there's no one answer.
Yeah, not only that, but that far up, people learn who that person is long enough, right? And so it's like I can flip a coin because I know they're going to give me two courses of action, right?
That's
Course of
correct.
action heads, course of action tails. Ready to
That's
go.
right. That's right. That's
No,
right.
I love you, sir, are a very powerful sword, to say the least. I'm getting like Gryffindor vibe type sword. The one that how can you say, you kill it like with the sword. The sword can only get stronger, it can never get
Yeah,
weaker,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yes,
and that might be the title of your podcast, the Gryffindor
that's
sword with
funny.
Steven.
That's funny.
Uh,
That's funny. I hear
um,
you though. Mm.
so I in that, right, there's some things that I'm wrestling with here, and there was like, it sounds like you've made yourself and you're carrying yourself quite well, to say the least. But one of the things you dialed in on earlier was your courage in the face of fear, and not only that, but like you're still driving towards discomfort. So it's kind of like a maybe an oxymoron or paradox or something like that, right? Because you have the courageous you're courageous enough to face your fears, and then you're also courageous enough to continue to go into the unknown. How
Mhm.
do you, how do you empower yourself to do that first, and then I would like to see how you would wield that sword with other people.
Hmm. Um, well, it's funny with that former president thing. I guess I lived a good portion of my life maybe afraid to push the envelope, afraid to lean in to the point of discomfort, because of my upbringing and feeling again at that point, that middle point between the Black and the white community. I didn't feel like I could lean in fully, that my story was so different that it would not resonate with either community. Honestly, I won't lie. 2020 as a specific year was a year that I really recognized what I was doing, that I was in fact going toward my fears. My daughter was going through a really long-term struggle with COVID. Had to withdraw her freshman year from university. Is fine now, but it was ugly. It was really just a rough year. And I was at IBM. I was a recruiter, and I just wasn't whole as a person. I was doubting everything. And in one of the trainings at work, it said something about, before you automatically consider leaving, why don't you consider staying and making where you are right? Oh, I know what it was. I had gotten contacted from a person who helps you get set up with TED Talks, and we were talking about a potential talk, and he said to me, is there no, like I was talking about, should I leave at that point? He said, no, why don't you figure out how you could stay and make it right? Make it, because I think my pattern had been after a number of years, I would leave and go to another organization. And so I chose to stay. But I said, if I'm going to stay, I need more from my company. I need more from myself. I need more from my institution. So I began to say, okay, within my company, how do I seek out who I am? And I started working with more historically Black colleges, university students. I started working with the P-Tech program. I started doing more of the kind of one-on-one coaching of people coming into IBM that brought some folks that into IBM, and it really allowed me to bring, if you will, my whole self to work. I used to feel like I was successful at work despite bringing my whole self in. And in 2020, I learned through a series of programs that I was a part of, one called IBM Unfiltered, where a panel group talked about just how you show up and how you are who you are, and that's okay, and that this institution expects you to do that. So it was that year that I really learned to really lean fully into being uncomfortable. I think until then, I didn't know that I would have recognized it. So I recently took on a role. I don't know if you know this. I went from having never managed people to having a team of 30. 30.
It's a lot of,
And
that's a lot of people.
and I coach each and every one of them twice a month, each and every one of them, supporting an external client that is massive. I am having to learn about being a manager. I'm having to learn about this process, this solution. When I say I'm afraid every day, 8 hours, 9, 10 hours a day, it is a literal definition. It was the final leap where I had no more safety net. It was going to be massive success or massive failure, because somewhere in the last few years, I figured out that and I don't mean that I hate cliched statements, but I was talking to my son the other night about failure. And I said to him, it's only failure if you stop. I don't really know how to define failure. I've had businesses fail from an economic point of view, but I would not consider those failures. And I don't mean some kind of Pollyanna twist the word. I'm talking they failed. And as long as I got up, is that still a failure? Is it? And I guess I've come to believe that up the ante, take the safety net away and leap even farther. And I would say the courage came in the recognition that failure only hits if I stop trying.
Okay.
But I want to be clear. I was already aware of being fearless. Like, I didn't want to, if I was afraid of heights, I would still go up the elevator or up the roller coaster with my kids or whatever. If I was uncomfortable with a cultural situation, I would still go into it. I was aware of it, but somewhere in 2020 with the George Floyd and with COVID and what I was going through and struggling with how I was at work, knowing that I needed to be more fully me, it was the recognition that failure was, I guess the recognition was that failure wasn't what I thought it was. Failure, I think, until then would have been something more cliched. But when I recognized that as long as I keep going, I'll be okay, I was willing to go faster, if that meant. Like, I told my daughter the other day, because she was struggling with something. I said, sweetheart, I need you to fail faster. I need you to fail more. And she kind of looked at me like, what is my father telling me here? And I was like, no, I need you to, when we get together in a month and talk about this, I want you to tell me all the places you tried and you failed. And the higher the number, the better. Because I want her to have a relationship with failure to your point about how you pass that on, I want her to have a relationship with failure that is not paralyzing, that it moves you forward. I won't lie, when I'm coaching my team members, my predominant point of view now is that, like, let's literally unpack what's stopping you from doing this. Let's unpack whatever you think that fear is. And what I found, which is shocking, John, that shocks me, is when I ask people to unpack why they are afraid of that, and I'll say, well, when did that happen before? Has that thing you fear ever actually happened? I have yet to have a team member say to me, yes, I did that before, and this is how I failed. So it's like we're afraid of the mythologies bouncing around in our head more than actual experiences that have warranted that particular fear.
That's an interesting way to put it. The mythology aspect. I really liked. I kind of like that idea, and then to kind of just flip it on its head a little bit. In a way, you're living a hero's journey in some regards too, and it's the question that I like to ask. Like, that is like, which is the better myth, right?
Oh, have you read Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth?
I have not yet. I do a lot of young, brother.
let me just tell you, don't bother with chapters 2, 3 from 2 on. Chapter 1.
That's all you need.
That's most
books. That's most books, actually.
That's true too.
That's most books. Like, normally, if I can map out a book, within the first like half of it, typically, like, I don't need the rest of it.
I agree. But with that passing of it to other people, I am in such a place now where I want it to come across correctly how I say this. When I say I'm impatient for them to get over their fears, I don't mean that in a way like I'm tapping my finger going, when are you going to get around to this? I'm saying I want you to be living without that now.
Yeah.
Yes, get after it. And the impatience is like, you have no idea what this, I want you to be in full expression of yourself now. And so the impatience is really around that.
I mean, I think you capture that really perfectly in with your daughter. I want to say that, if I got that right. Fail faster. Like, how many times do you fail? Keep failing, keep going, keep learning, keep pushing the envelope, and then you get an idea.
Let me explain an interesting mythology, and this is from I want to give it credit to Eckhart Tolle if it was him, but I have a lot of things come in and I never know quite where to put where you at the bottom of the paper tell where this idea came from. But perfect. So what I say to people, and I've done this with all of my children, all three, I'll say, okay, I'm going to write what you tell me. Tell me what you need to be happy. Tell me what needs to have occurred or be in place for you to be happy. And I'm not talking about silly things like I want to be, but like what do you need to be happy? And they'll give me the list. Item 1, item 2, graduate high school, graduate, get an A on this test, item 4, whatever it is. And I make the whole list and I say, is there anything else? And I do this with some of the people I coach as well. Make the list, the happy list for me. And they give me the thing. But what you don't understand is that if I'm magic and I'm able to grant you those wishes, take that magic that you talked about earlier in the sword, and if I'm able to grant it, do you understand that somewhere, even if it's a millisecond, there is a conscious flip switch that you have to flip? No matter how quick it is, it's like people feel like they have to deserve to be happy. And that is a tragedy to me, that people feel like they have to suffer and pain and pine in order to feel like they deserve happiness. So I go through the list and say, okay, imagine for the moment that these items are done, received. What would you do? And they said, well, it's almost like then I could then be happy. And I'm like, why don't you just disassociate the list from that decision? And Jim, I mean that. Literally, why are you associating something you have complete control over, which is the decision to be happy or to be more optimistic, when you're going to associate it with stuff you don't have any control or minimal or marginal control over? Just remove the list and go to the decision. You're still right here. You still have those things on the list. I'm telling you, I really believe that, and almost every day I make that decision. Make the decision. I'm still here.
Yeah, wield your sword, embody that decision to not let the world beat you down, and be in, like, I think this whole part of this conversation has been embodying this hero, your own hero myth, wielding the
It's funny,
sword.
I didn't think of it like that, and I'm so glad to hear you say that, because
Okay, so the pen, leaving your mark, your legacy, right? I mean, I think as someone who loves to read as much, like how both of us really like to read, the pen is a very powerful tool, right? Because it does help kind of provide a map, instructions. As you said, I just need to know, like tell me what you learned and why it's important. Don't tell me how you got there all the time. I don't need to know all that.
yeah.
And the fun question I get to ask here is, Stephen, 2,000 years in the future, you are nothing more than, you're gone, you're dust anyway, right? What is the one thing, like, if there was like a few sentences or something like that you want people to remember you by, the essence of your idea, what do you want them to remember you by?
I'm trying to really take sort of an atomic measurement of the things that impact me most and drive me most. I think it would come down to, I believe that people can change any behavior quantumly. It's just the behavior. The work that people confuse is the work to actually follow through on that mental change. Like when I made the decision to no longer be depressed, to no longer have self-doubt, that was a quantum moment. Do you understand? It was a decision in a second, and I believed it. It just took me 7 years for my behavior to embody that change. And I would say the one thing is the power of understanding that quantum decision is infinite, and it's everything that and possible. It's a moment's decision followed by follow through.
I liked how you phrase that, and it happens every so often.
Just say
sometimes
cuckoo.
I can't talk, but that's kind of ideas coming to my mind a little bit. It's like the right time, the right place. It's a cataclysmic event, I think, is a way to kind of characterize it.
Right? Correct. It's atomic. It's quantum. It's
nice.
And
I need to study more quantum stuff.
It's unbelievable. And one principle of quantum, just so you can know here on the call, flip a coin. While the coin is flipping, it is either heads or tail. But once it's landed, only upon observation is it either heads or tail. I'm trying to evolve during the spin as opposed to when it lands. Because the problem people have is they let it land. And that's when all that, the judgments and the lack of follow through happens. It's like, it's hard to explain it. I try to evolve when it's more fragile and let it strengthen by following through on it. If that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. It makes sense to me.
And that impatience comes in when I'm like, I'm 56 and I'm like, dude, if I figured this out.
That's how it works, right? Yeah.
It does. It does. But my sword part is I want others to figure it out.
Exactly. And not only that, but writing it down in that essence, right? Like that essence that remains like 2,000 years in the future. Like that whole idea captures that, I think, in more ways than one. And there's one more question that I'll ask is, what is the one thing that an archaeological dig is going to find in your house 2,000 years from now that represents who you are?
There was a point when my kids were quite young and I was overwhelmed like most young parents are. And life was happening too fast. And I would once a week limit myself to 15 minutes because that's all the time I had. I would simply write what happened this week with the kids. And I'll give you an example. I remember we pulled it out the other night and I wrote down, I would have never remembered this. Ryan gave Sophie grits for the first time and she loved them. I'd have never remembered that. And that's a nothing thing. But when I pull that book out, it just changes the whole energy in the house. It's our story, but it's a story of each of us, but it's the collective story. It is the single thing that they will say, a great man lived here who helped produce great people. And it's that red, weekly journal that shows the love and respect and diligence and follow through that I had for my family and myself, and the necessary honoring it took in seeing them even as little kids and enough and hearing them and honoring them to write it down, to render them their mundane experiences to pen, to show the body of work comprised in just this simple act of being loving and attentive. So as a single object, that would be it. It's representative of everything I am. Powerful. Father, parent, human, guide, coach, everything.
Yeah, that one thing.
Now it makes me want to move the book.
There you go. Yeah, you better go move it around. Make sure it's always in a safe space. That way, somebody can find it.
I love it. That's a great question. That's a great question.
All right, the crown. This is a lot of different things. It finally, in a way, it wraps everything up, right? It keeps everything in the middle. It is just great. And unfortunately, one of the questions that I had for this was answered earlier on, right? Which is, what is one of the hardest habits to overcome? And that self-doubt, bam, done.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So from a leadership perspective, right? Because the crown is that, right? Is leading others and leading yourself. And I must say, I think we've hit on both of those topics pretty hard. And I guess the question I would like to ask is, what is your greatest fear leading others?
That to be really clear about it, that my institution would require of me to lead in a way that I do not feel authentic. To name it, like, I seek to create a team of people who feel part of something, who feel competent, who can do their work simply and elegantly, and who feel seen and heard. And it would be unacceptable for my institution to say to me, and they have not, that you must lead them. You have to drive the numbers. You have to drive them with data. That would be my worst fear, is that you would make me lead inauthentically to me, because you lose all the power that I have. You lose all the sword, pen, and hammer. You lose everything if you're not using me in an aligned way.
If you don't mind me then elaborating on this a little bit, because I think this is always a reoccurring question. I always ask, in a business world that's just driven by data and data and data and data. And it's like, sometimes the higher up you go, the more micromanagement occurs because you're
Correct.
micromanaging by data. How do
And
you
we measure
maintain?
we measure everything. I'm not
Yes.
kidding. I've never seen so much data as is present now. And I look at the data, I'm aware of the data, but at some point you have to go, okay, data over here, this is a person.
Yeah.
I remember,
How do you as a leader really focus in on that? I know you alluded to coaching earlier, but
right, but
what else is important to you
there was
to
I wish I could give him
yeah.
credit for this. There was a IBMer who has a blog, and he said something like this. He said, when I manage my people, I have to remember that when the day is done and they leave the PC closed and they go home to their family, that I have to be careful how I influence who that person is. I'm paraphrasing. But essentially, if you don't honor and greatly and deeply respect the power of being a manager, you can destroy more than just that person. You can almost empower them to destroy others, their family, their wives, their husbands, their significant others, children. And it was just, I heard that early in my management, that you have to honor your role in how they are when the day is done, if that makes sense.
No, I
And
like
that, yeah.
I've never thought of it that way. And one of the things that I think is interesting, a way to think about that is, it's starting with the end in mind, the end of the workday, right? And like we talk about, the workday is kind of, I think, a good culminating point. Kind of like the grain of sand, right? Because every day can be this way. And looking at it that way, how do I know that this person got home? Yeah, it could be a tough day, it could be a hard day.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a day where they've had a meaningful impact, or like they see how they're working and they're working with the team, they're collaborating, they're solving problems, yeah, they may be tired, but they're able to come home to their wife, their kids, whatever the case may be, or their downtime in their Xbox, whatever, and be mostly fulfilled, right? And I
Right.
think that is a very important goal, and that I really never thought of it that way. And so thank you for helping me see that. That's a really great way to look at it.
But to your data question, so let me
Mhm.
explain the scenario I walked into. So I walked into a situation where I had 30 seats and there were only 14 people filling 30 seats. So my first job was to hire the other 16 seats. So if you have work pursuant to 30 people and there are only 14 people, what's happening? People are overextending themselves. They're leaving. They're unsatisfied. You're working them too hard. You know what I mean? So honestly, I didn't pay much close attention to the data until I got the seats filled. This coming Monday, I will have starting the 16th and 17th new member of my team this coming Monday. And I didn't even permit myself to think about data points until everyone was seated. And then the second thing before I start to think about data will be, do people have what they need? Do they know what they're doing? Are they trained to actually do it? How do they work their desk? When they open their computer and turn the computer on, do they know what to do first? If they do, why do they know that? If they don't, why don't they know that? What can I do to help? And then the second will be, how do they handle the work with this particular client? I know the data runs through that, but I refuse to use the data. I don't want to misuse your analogy. I don't want that to be a sword. I want their joy to be the sword. I want, like I say in every meeting, what are you adding this week specifically to add joy to your life? And people look at me like, I'm not used to managers talking like that. Or what are you going to specifically remove that's blocking your joy? I'm writing, be specific. And I get more feedback. And my manager also says it, that you're an inspirational leader. I didn't set out to be an inspirational leader. I set out to make sure people are seen and heard because I know what it's like not to be. And I don't like that feeling. So the data's there, but it's not my sword. It's not how I will wield my managerial largesse.
No, and that's perfectly reasonable. I actually, in a few interviews, Ted Benson's interview, we talked, and in Ted Benson's interview, we talked about don't crucify people over the process, right? Enable people through the process, and that was just a gold gem right there. It's almost like it's the same thing right there.
It is.
And so,
because listen, if people were leaving because, okay, so we get the seats filled, the work is pursuant to 30 people, so people feel copacetic, the amount of work is reasonable, we're paying them reasonable, and you add that they are also seen and heard. I believe that now, if someone tries to poach them, I'm a recruiter, remember I'm a recruiter. So if someone calls in and says, hey, why don't you consider coming over here? They have to consider more than just the title change, the money change, but they also have to consider, in my honest and humble opinion, if they feel that they are more joyful as a result of working at IBM for Stephen Spaulding, I believe that is a very powerful retention component.
Yeah, it is. I mean, most people want to work. I mean, the surveys are out and the surveys are clear, right? They want to work in a place where they have meaningful and I don't know if impact is the right word, but I think meaningful connections probably are a better way to look at this, right? Because you may not always know what your impact is.
Correct. I want people to walk away saying, I am better for working here.
Yeah, I'm inspired by the people I work with.
I can't think of anything higher than that from a Crown point of view. If I can do that, I'm good. I'm good.
Well, there we go. You already answered the next question, so I don't have to ask it.
So I keep jumping the gun on it.
No, you're good, man. You're good. No, So, Stephen, first off, thank you for coming on the Meaning Forge. And as we kind of get into your final words and whatnot, start building up into that. I must say it's been a great conversation, and one of the things, or there's many things here that I really had to reframe, right? And one of those was think of the last day, like your employee at the end of the workday. Like that's a huge thing to kind of reframe people, like leaders in leaders' way of looking at things.
Mhm.
And so what we see here is a story of you, and you realize your superpower by how you can connect with people, and you connect with multiple people. As you said, you were the Venn diagram, and we kind of talked a little bit about the chameleon, but the chameleon wasn't right.
Mhm.
It's the ability to connect with with a lot of different people at multiple different levels to, I would say, create authentic connections early. And through your education, through learning languages, I'm pretty sure you have a great way of thinking about things too, because the different languages enable different ways of thinking. Travel, study of economics, you really kind of took on this hero's journey of your own caliber, right? Like your own hero myth, as we were talking about earlier, and just a very hungry learner, and going after those quantum moments, pushing through discomfort, and I guess this the poetic part of this is revealing yourself against like revealing aspects of yourself, and then also that gradual sense of change to a quantum moment
Mhm.
where you're able to start overcoming like the tide has shifted. One of your greatest adversaries in your life, which is self-doubt and depression. Um, and I must say it was a great to listen to that, and very incredibly moving, right? Because it is sometimes that one grain of rice that just tips everything over. And so from there, we kind of start talking about how we build community and how we continue to build ourselves, but also empower the people around us.
Mhm.
And again, like we continue to see the like some of these themes about being authentic, being able to relate to people, being able to just, even if you don't know everything about that person or something like that, you can just listen to them. It's always it's a powerful tool to have. And I thank you so much for coming on. And IBM and many in any other company, I think will be delighted to have you
Mhm.
as a recruiter
Mhm.
because of that superpower, right? It's like you're really putting that superpower to use. However, I think no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you'll be able to put that superpower to use.
Mhm.
And so pursuing that meaningful work, living authentically, and really just getting after it is just one of the like there's so many different things and so many phrases in this interview that really have jumped out, and I thank you for that. So
You're welcome.
just as we kind of start closing up here, what are 3 books, you can only pick 3, that you think were the most influential or formative to you?
Um, okay. So The Power of Myth would be one by Joseph Campbell. Admittedly, the early chapter versus the late. Um, because it really was the first book that forced me to look at what something is, and that it can also be a discussion about its perspective. It's not just how something isn't just what I see it to be, but it's what
Mhm.
you see it to be. And all of those mythologies are true. When you think of something like race and racism, that's a pretty major statement. It's a way of having a tolerance for my brothers who aren't there yet. who see me because my skin has pigment as less than. And it allows me to embrace their mythology, even if I don't agree with it, but to see it and hear it, and in a way hope that by seeing it and hearing it, I can potentially, in that case, change their view about race. But the power of myth in that sense was really big. Eckhart Tolle was probably the author who showed me his own battle with depression, and he gave me, I don't know if in the book he overtly says, for example, this is what you, I'm sure he doesn't say, this is what you can say to your daughter, but he taught me the language of not fearing depression, your own depression, to such an extent that you don't look at it. Like, it's the beast in the corner and you do this. He's saying, look at it, break it down, what gives it its power, and honestly unpack it without fear. It was like, go into your baggage, your worst bags, without, with an open mind and open heart, and don't look the other way. This third one is a strength. I could have chosen any number of books for this third one, but it's more the symbol of it. I finally read Moby Dick, like 2 years ago. Maybe it was a year ago, but it wasn't Moby Dick. It was that I am now rereading. There's a program at a university called St. John's University. It's called the Great Books Program. You know how you've heard about Dante's Inferno and Aeschylus and the Iliad, Homer. I'm reading them all because I'm sick of not knowing what they're about. I'm just
You're in for a treat. They're awesome.
I'm just tired of not knowing. And I'm tired of having to Google it or ask someone else. So I'm reading. I read Moby Dick. It was okay. But it doesn't matter that I thought it was the great book or not. For me, I'm just tired of not knowing, so I'm going to do it myself. Stop depending on Google to tell you what your ideas are. Read it for yourself, and make the determination for yourself. And what I'm realizing, shockingly, is that these books aren't as hard as I thought they were. I don't know why somewhere people told me that, reading the Descension into Hell and the 7 layers of whatever, that it was just hard reading. And it really, I guess we are all exposed to Shakespeare pretty early. And if it doesn't click, it kind of blocks you for like literature at that level. And I think I thought that it would all be like that. And Moby Dick was kind of that, that symbol of the books that I hadn't read that I now go, I need to read that. I need to know what that story is about. So literally there's a 4-year curriculum called the Great Books Program at St. John's University in Maryland. There's a location out in New Mexico. You can follow the curriculum all on your own, and that's what I'm doing. So it's Moby Dick, but it's not just Moby Dick. It's all of those great books that I'm tired of not knowing the answer to.
That's awesome. I like that a lot. Huge fan of a lot of those things. So, so those are your 3 books. Yep. What? Actually, it's not what. Was there anything in this interview that stands out to you? Did you learn anything about yourself in this interview?
Yes. I want to say this right. That I need to push even harder on people to be who they are. I give this example at the beginning of each of my coaching sessions. I say to people, and sorry I have to use my hands, here are the people that you present to, your hiring managers, your clients, or whatever. This is you. This is the projection of you. This is the projection that you choose to put forward. And so if this is you and this is the client, somewhere back here is the actual you. And what I'm trying to figure out is what is the space between your projection and who you really are. For some people, it's pretty close. They're right on it. And I hope that mine is pretty flush. And it's okay if it's not, as long as you're aware that it's not. But a lot of my coaching starts with, why aren't you the projection? And I need you to reconcile that. I'm impatient about that. Because for a lot of people, we as human beings have these highly developed, many of us, senses of just something's not right. It's sort of like when you walk, like you walk in a room and you're just like, it just doesn't feel right. I try to stoke that knowledge, but
Mhm.
with folks, I want them to be the same. I don't want there to be this need for chameleons. I want people to be the projection, and that there's no gap. And what I've learned is I've got to run faster to bring more people to an understanding of them being their best self. It really became evident over this talk in some way that I've got to reach more people and wield the sword in a wider way than I have.
That's well, thank you. And that's really empowering. And so I hope that this interview can help you do that
I do
for
too.
others. So thank you so much again for coming on my show. My guest had the final word. I do not.
Okay.
So you get to have your final words, and I will give you the floor.
So I was trying to figure out the one message that I think drives kind of this whole reality that I've experienced in my life. And for me, it comes down to one particular thing, and that's being present right here, right now, with what I'm doing. So often in my own life in the past, I I was either living in the future or living in the past, but not in the present moment. As busy as I am at work, managing 30 people and having all the escalations and normal things that happen, the hardest thing I believe is when I'm talking to an individual customer, hiring manager, boss, colleague, uh, anyone on the team, is to be present with them at that moment fully, to not be thinking about what's going on out there behind the curtain, above, beyond, but to be fully present in the moment with the person you're with. And that's whether it's, and I believe that the ability to be present is the ultimate gift that one human being can give another. And it has taken me all 56 years of my life to be able to be fully present in the moment with whomever and whatever it is that I'm doing. And I say that as it's the ultimate gift you can give anyone in your life, your children, your spouse, your friends, anyone. And it's the ultimate gift that you can give yourself, to be present in the moment of what you're doing, whether it's on your own meditating or listening to music, or again, you're in a meeting, be in the meeting fully. I always say to my team members, the work we do is hard. It's a heavy lift. And it's going to be a heavy lift whether you do it with joy or whether you do it with agony. Um, it's 6:15 p.m. where I sit now, but tomorrow at 6:15, I can either shut it down and be present with my family until Monday morning, and come back refreshed and rejuvenated, and having seen and heard and been with them in every moment that I'm with them, and I start work again on Monday, or if I work all weekend nonstop and ignore my family and I'm not present and I'm not with them, and Monday morning comes, I say to my team members all the time, guess what? Either way, Monday morning comes, the work is still there, whether you worked all weekend or not, and or whether you rejuvenated yourself or not. And it's there whether you approach it with joy or with agony. I myself want to approach it with joy instead of saying I have to do something. I have on my board right now the words, I get to work with this team. I get to work with these people. And I consider that the ultimate mindset in being present. And if nothing else, with all the other things that we talked about, I would probably want to leave you with that as the final word. Be where you are, be with what you're doing, be with the people you are with in the moment. That's it.